Good day. Welcome to another lesson on our Super Dealmaker program. We're looking at access to funding, the skills program access to funding. And the topic that we will be going through today is access to grants and incentive funding or incentive schemes. We spoke about how you access commercial funding. We spoke about how you access, you can bootstrap your business. We looked at how you can have access to angel investors, right? So that those are the four type of access to funding methods or approaches that you can take. And then today we're looking at accessing the grants and incentive schemes. But how does accessing the grants and incentive schemes differ from accessing the other three? Meaning, how does it differ from bootstrapping? How does it differ from commercial funding? How does it differ from angel investing? Okay, all these three. One, bootstrapping, you are funding the business from your own pocket. So you are using your own money to fund your business, right? Commercial funding, you are looking for commercial funds from either the banks or the funding institutions. Those have terms and repayment terms and conditions. So you have to repay back a certain amount with interest or whatever. They might take equity depending on the structure of the business. So those commercial funding, you have to pay it back. Angel investing, generally, they take equity in the business. So they invest in businesses that have potential for high growth or businesses that they have a special interest in. They might have soft interest in maybe, I don't know, saving the world. If you're doing let's say a green project, angel investors might come on board and fund you and then take equity investment, meaning take shares in your business. Those are angel investing. Then on the grants and incentive scheme funding, okay, I'll just call it grant funding. Incentive schemes and all those things, they are more or less the same. So you are getting the grant. A grant is the money that you get that you don't have to pay back. Okay. And generally, the grants are from government. So you find that government have interest in developing certain industries or developing certain sectors. So what they do is they develop the grants, they have the conditions in terms of who can apply, what sector, what are the socio-economic benefits. Generally, the grants are focused on the socio-economic benefits in terms of, I find that maybe generally there will be small businesses or rural businesses, women, youth, disability, or poverty alleviation, those soft type of business, agriculture, cooperatives. So those are type of businesses that will generally have schemes that support them, and then they don't have to pay back the money. That's the most important thing. That's the main difference. So accessing this, you must be in the right sector or a relevant sector or compliant sector, the sector that government is looking at developing. Or sometimes we have big businesses that can afford to provide grants and schemes to promote certain sectors. And it can be local government or it can be maybe NGOs. Like you can have an NGO that is pushing a certain agenda. Okay, agenda sounds wrong. Or they're pushing a certain industry or a certain objective. Then they are able to fund businesses in that sector. So that's how the NGO also give grants to businesses. And you also have international businesses or international developmental institutions, right? Maybe you can have a German development bank or European development bank or whatever. They come maybe, let's say, to Africa or South Africa. They want to fund, they give grants in, let's say, in the energy space, green energy space. Then they fund businesses that are in a green energy sector or space. So they give them, let's say, grants or schemes that are more free in a certain way, but they'll have their conditions. So the only challenge is that, yes, you're getting free money, but that free money is not just free money. It comes with conditions. If it's an international business or international developmental institution that wants to fund a certain sector in South Africa, it will have its condition to say you need to employ so many and you need to have so many employees, whatever, or so many youth, whatever the categories. It depends. Some there maybe you find that it must be a women business, or it must be a business with people with disability, or it must be in certain sectors. So grants are very, very specific in how they fund, and they have conditions. It's not just or they can be grants for generic business, but I haven't seen those. So the grants, just for you as an entrepreneur to understand, grants have specific objective and the intent. So the government or the developmental institution or the NGOs or the international businesses, we just call them a grants providers. They will have specific conditions that you need to meet for you to access that money. So if you want to access this market, you need to know who are the players in this market. Okay, later on we'll go through the players and just explain who are the players and how they operate in their targeted market segments. But it's an exercise of the entrepreneur to say, okay, every entrepreneur, you must not say you don't want grants. I know one of the disadvantages of grants is that they are tedious. The process is tedious. It takes long for you to submit. Sometimes you don't even get feedback whether or not your application was successful. And it's like tenders where you have so many people applying for the grants, because the conditions are a little bit relaxed. So you have so many people applying, and the chances of your success are limited. The chances of you accessing the grants the chances are limited. But that doesn't mean you should not apply. Yes, you might not have the time, but you must develop a system that will allow you to be able to identify the grants in your space and look at their qualifying criteria to see if, one, you qualify, and you look at the ones that are a little bit technical in there. They have like a little bit strict technical requirements that will help you or will give you an advantage if you apply. There are certain generic ones to say, we're looking at for spaza shops in rural communities or rural areas. There are so many of those. And you might find that, but the only differentiating factor is it might be that they're looking for, one, obviously, to look for registration document, proof of bank account, proof of operating license, ID copies, financial statements of those businesses. And they might look at maybe the license, the financials, which are the two things that most of retailers might not have, the spaza shops that you'll be competing with. And they might not look for CSD, meaning they must be registered on CSD. So in that case, you might have an opportunity, because spaza shops in that sector, because they're not doing business with government, they might not be registered on CSD. So if you are registered on CSD, then that can give you an advantage. So you look at, when you're applying for grants, look at the grants that have stricter conditions. They give you more, a high chance that you can secure a grant. But many people apply for grants, and it's not a funding mechanism that you can rely on. If you get a grant, great, you are lucky. But you can't set up or build a business around relying on grants, right? And I've seen so many businesses that they're not sustainable. The only way to sustain them is through grants. And because they received one grant, the only thing that they stay alive is because they are hoping to get another grant. And this program is not for people who are relying on grants. It's for people who want to use the grants that they receive to expand or to grow the business so that they can build sustainable businesses. Access to grant, that means free money. So you must have a strategy around that to say you will apply for grants and how you're going to do it. But you must not pin your hopes on pin the survival or the sustainability of the business on the grants, because you might get them, you might not get them. So it's just the call it lucky packet. Whatever. Many people will qualify for grants, and if they choose you for that particular grant, great, you are the lucky one. But it must not be the strategy that you rely on. The business we sustain through grants. Okay, that business is likely to fail. Now, what you're supposed to do as an entrepreneur, you need to understand the landscape. Who's providing grants in your sector, and how do they do it for you to be able to access this grant market, and what are the requirements? So you scan through the sector, you look at the requirements for you to access the grants. So if there are no grants advertised, right, in your sector, you can even go to historical data to look at different grants. If they get advertised, what are they looking for, right? So that you can prepare upfront on the documents that are required, so that when the time comes for you to apply for the grant, you're not running around. You have your documents ready. You know the documents that are required in your sector to access the grants. It's very, very important to understand the landscape. You investigate, you look at the types of grants that are available, you look at the qualifying criteria, and then you get different qualifying criteria from different grants that are there, and then you prepare the documents according to the required. So you make sure that you maintain a system that will ensure that you are compliant. If grants require tax clearance, B certificate, bank account, financial statements, CSD, you need to make sure that, I'm just giving an example of these 5 documents. You need to make sure that you have these documents and they are always up to date and they are compliant with the requirement of whatever the grants providing institution, a funding institution. So you maintain that so that when that opportunity comes, right, it might have, remember sometimes the grants have start and end date, or the opening date where you can apply and the closing date. So you need to make sure that if you have the document, they want permit to operate and all that, you know that if there's a window for grants, then you have your documents ready to submit. That's very, very important if you want to access this market. You must always be business ready. Because if you don't do that, say the window is open, you might not be in a position or financially maybe to hire an accountant to do the financials for you, or maybe do something like that. So what will happen is you'll miss the deadline or the submission, and you might not be able to access that. Maybe it's once in 3 years or whatever, or it's a once in a lifetime type of opportunity. But if you're running a system where you know the documents that are required, or you know the qualifying criteria, and you make sure that you maintain the qualifying criteria, that will make it easier for you to say, once the grant opportunity is open, then you know that you have your document ready. Then you can just throw in and hope for the best. So that's systematically, that's how you need to approach them accessing the grants. Make sure that you understand which businesses or which government department or international institution or NGOs provide grants in your sector, make sure you have the document ready, the required documents. They're up to date as required by those institutions, and you regularly monitor their website. Because, okay, what I do is sometimes, because I'm in a training space and most of the trainings are advertised in the government departments. So what I do is I've identified the departments that will offer the trainings that you are accredited for, and I regularly monitor their website. Maybe it can be once a week, ideally, but 2 weeks doesn't pass without me checking the relevant sites or the relevant institution to see if there are no opportunities advertised. This applies to you as an entrepreneur. If you want to access funds from the grants or the incentive, you need to know the institution like your DTI, your Small Business Department, your CEDA, your NYDA, those institutions that advertises grants. Then you apply, or big institutions that have the schemes or the incentive schemes that you can apply for. You identify those institutions, you make sure that you monitor so that you don't miss out on the opportunities that might be advertised. So it's very, very important. Make sure that you have the documentation that are required in your sector to access the grants. 2, identify the institutions that are generally providing the grants in your sector. You monitor those to make sure that you don't miss out if the opportunities are advised from those relevant institutions. Okay, now we're going into how do you apply for business grants. Okay, it depends on the grant and on the qualifying criteria and the process, right? It depends, because when they advertise for grants, they will indicate how you're supposed to apply. Okay, but it must be clear to say, if when you're applying, there are few things that you need to make sure that they are in place, right? One is you need to have your company registration documents in order. Company or organization, it can be a cooperative, NGO, or whatever the business that you're running, but you must have your company documents in order. And once you have your company documents in order, you must have your CIPC annual return fee paid, right? That 100 Rand or whatever the amount is. Because remember, if that is not paid or is not, your business is not compliant, if it's non-compliant, it can be in deregistration process and all that. So because CIPC can deregister businesses that are dormant. So to make sure that your business is not in the process of deregistration, you need to make sure that your CIPC documents are in place and your annual payment has been paid to make sure that your business is active. Remember, there is no one who will, okay, they can, but they're not supposed to support businesses that they are in final or in deregistration. It makes sense. I mean, it's a risk that the permanent, you can approve this business and it gets deregistered. So it will be sort of negligent and non-compliant of some kind. If, most especially when it comes to grants, because the grants, as I said, they're mainly from government institutions. I've said that you have NGOs, you have international TFIs that will support or provide grants, but mainly are from government institutions. So you need to make sure that your company documents are your company registration, your memorandum of incorporation, your constitution, your shareholder certificate, your shareholders agreements are all in order, right? And then the second one is you need to make sure that your tax affairs are in order. So you have the tax clearance. And not only having the tax clearance, right? You need to make sure that you are actually compliant, because now with the tax clearance, they don't only look at the tax clearance. They actually look for your tax PIN, and they use your tax PIN to check if today your business is compliant. You can have a tax clearance that says you are compliant from this date to this date. So you might have that hard copy document, but that and still valid. That document must still valid, because remember they issue the tax return, not tax return, the tax clearance for it's annual from this date to this date. But if you don't submit certain returns in between, you can have a hard copy that says you are tax compliant, but when they check using your PIN, they find that you are not compliant. That's the challenge. So even if you have the tax clearance, it doesn't mean you are compliant. So make sure that you regularly maintain your tax affairs in order. You are always compliant. Okay. Then generally, B certificate, because it's a softer thing, so they want you to be compliant with the BC legislation, meaning you develop the previously disadvantaged and all this. You are doing the good things that you're supposed to be doing. So make sure that you have your B certificate or affidavit. If you are turnover is less than 10 million rand, obviously, then you don't need necessarily the certificate from the verification agents. You just need the affidavit, the B certificate or the B affidavit. Right. And make sure that you have your banking or your financial affairs in order, meaning you need to make sure that you have a bank account which is operational and it's active, because remember they won't give you cash. They will deposit in your bank account depending on the type of grant. Some grants they buy you whatever that you're looking for, but some grants also they can fund your working capital. So if they are funding your working capital, it means you need to have a bank account that they need to put money into, right? And then you need your figure documents, right? It's for the business and for the directors. Meaning what? Okay, the figure document generally is the proof of res, proof of for the company you need proof of res, right? Or it might be PTO or lease agreement or just the proof of address. And what I've seen recently is that they also need the proof that you have the necessary licenses. Meaning, if you're a spaza shop or if you are a service station, you need to have the necessary licenses. So if you have a spaza shop, you need to have an operating license. It's very, very important. So if you don't have it, make sure you work on that to get the necessary operating licenses. Before you see the advert for grants, make sure that you have the necessary operating license. You need to understand your sector and then know the operating licenses that are required in your sector. That's very, very, very important. So that when you're doing this, certain grants might not be interested in those, but for you, make sure that you are ready to access that market. Make sure that you have the operating license. And then I said the figure, the proof of address where the business is operating from. For the directors and shareholders, you also need the proof of address or the figure documents. So it will be the ID copies and the proof of address for the directors. That's generally the compliance documents that they're looking for. And then the other thing that they might be looking for is your business plan, right? To understand the business. You understand the business from the business plan. And your business plan must have obviously the breakdown of the amounts required, which it must not be a thumb-sucked figure. It must be an amount that is supported by quotation. So let's say you need a grant, let's say 2 million rand grant, right? That amount that you say you need, it must be supported by the necessary quotations so that they can verify that this figure is coming from a reliable source, which are quotations. And I always advise entrepreneurs, even if they say it's just quotations, but try and obtain 3 quotations. Why 3 quotations? Because 3 quotations, it shows that the figure that you've put in is reasonable by getting 3 quotations. Because by getting 1 quotation, you might find that you give them a crazy figure. But if it's 3 quotations, it will show the reasonability of the money that you're looking for. So if it's 2 million, you need to have quotations for that 2 million, and maybe for each quotation, for each line item that you're looking for, you need to have 3 quotations for that line item, just to be safe. Not only being safe, but also for you to make sure that you get value for money. Because if you get 1 quotation, what if it's overpriced? But if you get 3, you might find a supplier that will supply you at a reasonable price, meaning that 2 million grant that you're applying for, it can go a long way because you can add other things that can help you. But if you just take the first quotation that you have, you will tend to overprice. It tends to be paying more than you're supposed to, which now it will be a problem. As an entrepreneur, you need to make sure you retain every cent. You need to make sure that you get proper quotations. So in the business plan, obviously it will highlight the strategy, the things that you do, the services and all that, and it must have the breakdown of the capital that you're looking for, which it must be supported by quotations, right? And that will now go into your financial projections. They want to see how the money is going to be applied and the impact of that grant. So your business plan must have financial projections, meaning it must show that maybe actually the first 2 years you must do them annually. That means your income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow, they must be monthly projected, and the last 3 years or whatever years that you want to project, but minimum 3 years, they must be annual. So if you don't know what is an income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow, we have a module called Finance for Managers. In there, we explain what is the cash flow, what is the income statement, what is the balance sheet, how do you use them, how do you interpret them, how do you understand, how do you prepare them. So in that lesson, it goes into detail on preparing your income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. But here, the focus of this lesson is on the grants. If you want to learn more about those, then you can go to our Finance for Managers. Then you'll learn a little bit more on what is the financial statements, how do you read them, how do you interpret them as an entrepreneur. So you're coming back to the business plan, it must have your financial projection, right? It's very, very important so that the relevant funding institution will understand how you're going to use the funds, the values and the customers and the operations, because the business plan gives the user the overall understanding of the business that you are operating. So it's very, very important. So that's the business plan. So if you have these documents, these are the basic documents that are generally required. And then you get exceptional cases where there are specific things. Remember, each industry requires specific things, right? There might be maybe compliance, some more compliance documents that are required, or there might be other conditions. Remember, these 6 documents that I just mentioned, they are not necessarily all the documents that will always be required. I'm mentioning them because there are critical documents that probably 99.9% of grants required documents criteria, they will require this document. And because you are also dealing mostly, because the grants are, as I said, they are from state or provided by a government institution, we are dealing with institution that needs to comply. So they need to make sure that they give grants to deserving individuals. So by having these documents which are up to date and relevant, it will put you on a better position to receive the grants, because they will see that you are prepared, you have all the necessary administrative documents. So once you prepare those are ready, Then make sure that you complete the application form and you submit it on time. Right, that's very, very important. You complete the application form, you submit it on time, and once you complete it and submit it, at least request for a confirmation of some kind that they've received your application and all is in order, to make sure that you covered the basics that you submitted. They normally even have a checklist there to check if you submitted all the documents. And there might be 10 things that are required in addition to these things that we've mentioned: the application form, the financials, the tax clearance, the compliance, the operating licenses, the BE certificate, the FICA documents for the business, and the FICA documents for the directors. In addition to those, depending on specific grant or incentive scheme, there might be additional documents. So what you need to do is to make sure that you read the required documents in detail, right? And the qualifying criteria. You need to make sure that you understand, because you might submit for grants that you don't qualify for, which is a waste of time. And you can see the document that you need to submit, it's a lot. And the form that you need to complete, it's not a one pager, it's quite few pages. There might be certain things that you need to go. So it's a time consuming process. So you need to make sure that you understand the criteria, qualifying criteria, and the required documents. And once you complete the application form, you attach all the documents. Make sure that you are able to tick that they wanted this, is there, wanted this, wanted this, and you submit. Once submitted, you request the confirmation that your application has been received. That's how you do the application. That's the process that you should follow, and make sure that all the grants or applications for grants and incentives, all the applications that you do, you follow this process where you identify the qualifying criteria and you assess if you have them. If you don't have them, don't waste your time. Then if you have the qualifying criteria, then you go to the list of required documents. And then, as I've said, that I've mentioned the basics, but basic documents that might be required. But you look at maybe additional ones that they may be required, then you make sure that you attach all the documents. And if there's an application form that you need to complete, make sure that you complete the application accordingly. And most importantly, make sure that you submit application on time, because generally this request for proposals and all those, they generally work within a certain time frame, and they follow the PFMA. And if you submit late, your application won't be considered. So make sure that you submit on time. And once you've done this, we just have to sit and hope for the best. But sometimes we tend to just wait, do the follow-up so that you can manage your expectation. You might find that you're still thinking that your application has been processed. Only learn that no, we've appointed and all those things is done. So generally, when you submit proposal, there is a validity period to say this proposal that you submitted is valid for 90 days or 60 days or whatever. So once those dates pass, that means what you have submitted is no longer valid or under consideration, unless they send you an extension letter for if they are still evaluating the tender, or they're still evaluating the missions. So that's how you generally apply for grants and incentive scheme. But just keep in mind what I said earlier. You need to identify institutions that provide them the tenders, and make sure that you do the follow-ups. And now we're going to go into just the general institution that provides tenders, and then we'll just go through them in short, but it's not exhaustive. There are other institutions that might be providing such grants and incentives. So just make sure that you understand your industry and where to check. But I'm going to give you the institutions that you are likely to qualify for grants from those institutions. Now that we've gone through the generic process and the required documents and how you can apply for grants and incentives if you want to access the funding from the grants. Now, I'm going to look at the institutions that provide grants. Like, these are not, as I said, not exhaustive, but these are key institutions that you need to look at. You can visit their website and understand their processes and look at the different schemes that are providing, right? The first one is the DTIC. Okay, it's DTI, previously known as DTI, Department of Trade and Industry. Now they've added C, which is the competition, right? Competition Commission, but they just added the C, it's called DTIC. DTI is the mother of all grants and incentives because the main function of DTI is to develop industries, right? And you need to understand that to develop industry or to develop an industry, sometimes you need to fund it through grants or funding that is not restrictive or is not going to suffocate the businesses. So that's why I'm saying, if you're looking for the king of grants and incentive, DTI is your place, right? Because intention, their mandate, their objective is to develop industry. So once in a while, DTI will identify key strategic objectives that they want to achieve, given their government mandate. And they will identify key sectors that need support in South Africa. So once they've identified those key sectors and they develop a funding modalities or funding models for that sector, or not necessarily for a sector, but for a certain business model that they want to develop so that they can support a different. So you find that there is a black industrialist as a scheme, right? Which was, you can get funding for up to 50 million, which 50% is a grant. So black industrialist is not industry specific, but is driven by the need to develop black industrialists in the country. So to say we don't have sufficient black industrialists in South Africa or black people who are in manufacturing sector. So for DTI to develop the black industrialists, then they developed that black industrialist scheme, which support black manufacturers or black producers or black people who are in the industries that are mainly manufacturing. So that was the incentive. I'm just giving an example, and they developed that because they felt there is a need to support that sector. So what happened is with DTI, there are different things. Like we find that there's innovation, where they give grants to innovative ideas in technology. You find that there's maybe certain manufacturing enhancement programs. I remember MSEP, and there are different sectors, and you find that maybe there are grants where they are funding a certain type of models where there's a partnership between government and private institutions and maybe local government institutions. So depending on the need of the country at the time, the DTI will come with different grants and incentive schemes to fund businesses. So it's very, very important to understand what DTI does and then what types of relevant grants are there on their website, because they are well advertised on their website. If you go to DTIC, you'll find that there's a grant tab, grants and incentive tab. Okay, they can call it whatever, probably they might change it. But if you go into the incentives, the grants and incentive tab, then you'll see all their incentive schemes or the grants and incentive schemes that they have. And then you can just read through in terms of the criteria if you qualify as an entrepreneur or as a business. Then once you qualify, And there are criteria, as I've mentioned, the documents that are required. Those are generally the documents that are required by DTI, the ones that we've summarized earlier. Then you identify the relevant ones, and then you download the form, you complete the forms accordingly, and you submit to DTI, and DTI will do their evaluations, and then they'll decide if you are getting granted the incentive or not. So there are a lot of incentives on the DTI website. Make sure that you go there or you monitor it regularly, and then just be the friend or the friends of DTI. Know what they're doing, their event, and what type of incentives they have on their platform. That's the main government institution that specializes in developing industries, and they provide a lot of grants. So that's the DTI. And then the second one, which is now it's based on my personal ranking. It's not like a specialized ranking or something. It's based on my personal experience to say the second one now is the Small Business Development Department. It's been running a lot of grants, which mostly like they were targeting, most especially even after the COVID, where they're targeting businesses that were affected by COVID. But that's just to rejuvenize the SMME and the rural economy. They develop a lot of grants. They have Spaza Shop grants. They have Chisanyama grants. They have different grants. Maybe farming. They have cooperatives. So they have a lot of grants that they're doing. I remember they had bakeries. They had people who are doing hair products and all those things, and saloons and all those things. So those grants, but they change. It's just that the ones that I'm mentioning now, they are the current grants that they are running. But Small Business Development Department, it runs as well. I think probably in terms of value, it might be second to DTI. There might be other institutions, but I believe personally, based on my knowledge, and the Small Business Development Department is second to DTI in terms of the amount of grants and the amount in terms of value of the grants and the number of schemes that they are running. So as an entrepreneur, keep monitoring the Small Business Development Department to see if there are any opportunities or any grants that have been advertised on their website, because you might miss out. And as well, they follow more or less the same process. But I understand that strategically there is a process to combine the Small Business Development Department, SEFA, which is Small Finance Enterprise Agency, Small Business Finance Enterprise Agency, and then with SEDA, which is the Small Enterprise Development Agency. So those are the three institutions that it seems like there is a strategic process that they are busy with to combine them. So the grants that I'm talking about from Small Business Development Department are being implemented through SEDA and SEFA. So the Small Business Development Department is using SEFA and SEDA to implement. So you find that SEDA is the one that will go out there, invite service providers, or facilitate or invite service providers to get potential applicants. And then once SEDA and train them and do other non-funding support to businesses that qualifies for the grants. Then after SEDA has done its part to prepare these small businesses to access this funding, then the funding institution used SEFA. So SEDA provides the non-funding or the non-financial support, meaning preparation of the business plan, finding these guys, making sure that they are compliant, and once their applications are ready, they take them to SEFA. Then SEFA is the one that will process the actual funding of those projects. But you find that the actual scheme or the grant is being run or is being operated or is being mandated from the small business development department. I don't know if it's making sense. So small business development department establishes the grants, the schemes, the incentives that they want to provide to small businesses, and they use SEDA as call it the implementing agent for non-financial business support, like preparing the entrepreneurs in terms of business plan, compliance documents, and all that. So once the SEDA is done with the non-financial support, then the implementing agent for the actual funding, it becomes SEFA, where now you submit the application to SEFA, and the SEFA, then you get funded through SEFA. But sometimes I know SEDA as well, they do get the budget to fund certain projects, easier ones, and then as well as SEFA. But the main funding implementation, it happens at SEFA. But I don't know, that's the current setup, but I know they want to consolidate them. But that now will probably revise the video when that happens, or we'll just do additional video on the new landscape when it comes to the small business development and SEFA and SEDA. But those are the if you want to access, more especially this is targeted at small businesses, right? So what is defined by a small business? I know currently, I think SEFA's mandate is up to 15 million. So if you are looking for anything below 15 million, I think the SEFA and SEDA and small businesses are your type of institution that will be able to assist you with the grants and all that. And then otherwise, if it's bigger, but even the smaller ones, you can still go to DTIC, but DTIC as well, it does bigger project, because I know, I mean, as I said, for that Black Industrialist Fund, I mean, the maximum was what, 50? So if the maximum is 50 million, it means that now they are willing to support even the bigger, massive project. But with small business development, as the name says, the focus is on SMMEs. So the focus is on SMMEs. If you're an SMME, look at the grants and their grants as well. As I said, they have their qualifying criteria and they have their required documents. So make sure that you understand the required criteria and the required documents. And keep on checking with SEFA, SEDA, and small business websites to see if there are any opportunities or any grants or incentive opportunities. So that's now on the small business department, SEFA and SEDA, the grants. And sometimes they can have the grants of their own, not necessarily coming from small business, but those are the institutions that you need to keep in mind and continuously look at their website to see if there are any opportunities advertised there for grants and incentives. But just to add, SEFA is not only doing grants. I know SEDA doesn't do loans. If there's any funding that comes from SEDA, it will be grants. So, but SEFA, it does commercial funding. So it might be a combination. There might be grants in there. There might be funding. And I know the recent program from Small Business Development Department, it was more on they call it blended funding. So they don't give you 100% grant. They give you 50%, it becomes a grant, and 50% becomes a loan. Or whatever. Sometimes the percentage is depending on the scheme. I know the cooperative scheme, it's 70% grant and 30% loan. So, but for the other ones, it was 50-50, depending up to the 350,000. That means 50% becomes, or up to the maximum of 50,000. So if you borrow 350,000, then the 50,000 becomes a grant, and the balance is the loan that you need to repay. But on those schemes, the interest rate were very, very low. So read carefully. If you see advertisement on the grant, understand the criteria, understand the document required, and understand the conditions of disbursement. Is it a loan? Is it a blended funding? Or is it a grant? Is it 100% grant? So the understanding becomes very, very important so that you don't start the process. As I said earlier, the process for applying for grants is extensive. It needs time to be invested. You need to make sure that you have understood the requirements, you understood the criteria, and you understood the terms and conditions of that application that you're making. Because you might think you are applying for 100% grant, you only realize that maybe 50% is it's a loan that you have to repay back. That's the current generic model of Small Business Development Department, SEDA and SEFA. That's how, when you want to access the grant market, those are the institutions that you can approach, and then that's how they operate. They usually use SEDA to do the non-financial support, putting together the business plan, putting together the application, finding the relevant application or SMMEs, and they use SEFA to actually as the actual funding implementing agent. So those are the SEFA, SEDA, and Small Business Department grant funding process that you need to understand. Then the next one is the NYDA grants and funding schemes. NYDA is your National Youth Development Agency. That one is targeting and focused on youth, meaning you need to be younger than 35 or 35 and younger. So, and their scheme is focused on most especially like your business plan development, system development, training, and a limited funding, as in like cash funding. And I think currently the first timers, they give you about 50,000, still have to be youth. And then the second time round, they will give you 100,000. So you apply for the first round. Okay, mainly the initial one, generally, is to develop a business plan, systems, reporting systems, or whatever that you need, the training. So they get you ready, right? So that one, generally, it's a voucher. They call it a voucher program. They give you a voucher for you to select a service provider from their list of suppliers. And then you select service provider. You might be looking for business plan, implementing a financial management system, or marketing material and development. So they have pricing to it. So with that voucher, they don't pay it into account. They pay the service provider to provide you that service. So that's the first batch or the first group of NYDA's funding. The second one is the 50,000 one. Once they help you with that one, or once you've proven that you are sorted with the first phase, you have the business plan, you have the systems in place, you have your marketing and all those things in place in terms of website, brochures, drop downs, and all those things. Then you move to the next phase, which is the 50,000. So they give you 50,000 grant. You obviously still need to apply. You still need to submit all those documents that I mentioned, your business plan, your company documents, your figure documents, quotations, how much you need, and all those things for the 50,000. And then once they provided you with 50,000, then you used it and you reach a certain point, then you can get the 100,000. So I'm not sure if you can get the total of the 150,000, or they will always strictly follow this process. And then I believe that once you've proven that you pass the stage of 50,000 and you have your systems in place, you've done your trainings, you've done your mentorship, you are ready to move to the next level, then they will give you the 100,000. So, but what the main thing is, okay, the amounts might be different, whatever. It depends on the amounts, but there are those grants. They can be adjusted later, because like sometimes when you're doing the video, this video can be watched 2-3 years later and say these amounts are different. But that's how it generally operates, unless the operating model as well changes. So what they do, the main thing is to get you to a certain point, right? To mentor you, to make sure that you have the necessary skills as a youth entrepreneur, to make sure that they give you initial funding. If you remember, we had the bootstrapping funding then. So sometimes the youth, they might not have the money to bootstrap themselves. So this one is more a replacement for that, to say youth, they don't have money to set up, to grow, to build systems, to get ready to do big business. So NYDA has got those incentives and grants to help you be set up, be a legit business, so that you can now be ready to access funding from the big players or serious funding. That's NYDA. You have to be youth. And the next one is what? Is the TIA, Technology Innovation Agency. This is established to mainly fund innovation. They're also using grants. They fund innovation, especially in technology or anything new, to do things differently. So this one as well, they have windows that they open, and then the application process starts, and you submit your applications, and they do the selection criteria. And I think they also have a little bit of incubation of some kind, where they give you business support, give you enterprise development support. So TIA is more for innovation. It's also a government agency, which is under the Telecommunication and Technology Department. I don't remember the politically correct name of that department, but it's the Department of Telecommunication and Technology Department. So they have that TIA as an agency to fund innovations and new products to market. So there as well, they have different windows for different products. Then you can apply there. And then maybe the last one that you want to touch is on the Jobs Fund. As well, there are grants, they call it Jobs Funds. As well, the Jobs Funds, I don't know how long that will continue, but it seems permanent now because it's been in existence for years. So the Jobs Funds as well, it identifies the key sector that it can unlock job creation in the country. So they also regularly advertise a certain type in a specific time. So they'll have whatever the project that they are working on. So that it's not just open for funding. They have windows that are open, but for the specific type of projects. So you must just keep them in mind, keep on monitoring their activities to see if they've advertised the grants or the schemes that are relevant to you. Because that one is more specially, but what it does, what it encourages actually, is not directly to SMMEs. They fund or they co-fund with a bigger institution that has got capacity, and that institution should develop SMMEs in that sector to supply it or to supply whatever. So it's more like an enterprise development kind of setup where government partners with the private sector to develop a certain sector in the economy. And then even though you might not, if you are not a large organization with the experience, you might not be able to apply directly to them. But if there was a window open for a specific industry, you can contact them to find out who was appointed, what's the process if you want to be on that program, so that you can receive the relevant support. So the Jobs Fund is also there, and it's massive, and it's got different windows that are open. Just have to inquire with them to understand which windows have been opened, who has been approved, how can you participate. You might not be funded directly by the Jobs Fund, but you might be funded by an institution that was appointed by the Jobs Fund. That's how the Jobs Funds work. This is not exhaustive list of agencies that provide grants and incentives, but this is a start. You can research, just read a little bit more on the sector to understand which other institutions are available out there that can assist you with accessing the funding using the grants and incentive. And as I've said, grants are non-repayable, so they are a little bit easy on the balance sheet and on the repayment. So if you receive the grants from any institution, it will go a long way. It's like receiving equity. It's cheaper. It's not cheaper, actually. It's free. There might be conditions attached to it. It might be difficult to get, but if you get it, it will be able to give you that room to breathe, because you don't have to pay back the grants. I thank you. That's our lesson on accessing the grants and incentive schemes, and hopefully the lesson was useful. You'll be able to use it to access funds from different institutions using the institution that provides grants and incentives. I thank you.